This is part 2 of the mansion murders, the unsolved double homicide of John and Geraldine Magee. Behind closed doors, something went terribly wrong. A crime so brutal, it still echoes decades later. What happened inside that house? And why has no one ever been held accountable?
It appeared to us that whoever was the main target, the other one also had to be murdered for whatever reason, because they were separate. Jack went to work, Geraldine was at home, and if either one of them were the target and the other one didn't need to be murdered, then why not kill one when they were apart rather than, basically engage in riskier behavior by killing two people. So that was our thought, that the timing, the evening hours when they would still be awake, when the offender would know they would likely be home, because most people are home at that time. It's a little after the dinner hour. People are winding down. So we felt that, there may be one of them who was the priority target and the other one also had to be killed. But we just didn't have a determination of which one would be the primary target. But to us, killing both of them was necessary for whatever the reason was for the killer, whatever the motive was. And we thought it was a personal cause homicide. But beyond that, we couldn't really determine a specific motive. Overall, low risk. And from everything that we have available to us that we know, there didn't seem to be financial motives. I think they knew their routine. They knew that they weren't going to be interrupted. They knew they could go there and maybe sit with them for, a few minutes or maybe even longer. We don't know for sure, but go into the house and know that they weren't going to be interrupted, that they weren't expecting anybody else, that nobody else lived there. I mean, it's a big house. So, you look at that house and you may think, let's just say it's a total stranger that walked in, you don't know who else might be there. Do they have, children there? Do they have family staying? Do they have company? Are there, multiple families living there? I mean, it's a huge home. So I think that the offender most likely had information about their routine. I think the offender knew them. I think they knew that they would be home alone, that he wouldn't be interrupted, that he'd be able to take the car. He'd know where the keys were. He'd be able to get away. And that comes from either having interactions with them or having interactions with people who know them well and have disclosed information to the killer about them.
In Massachusetts, history lives on every street corner, in every town center, in every quiet neighborhood. You think you know. But behind some of those places are stories that never really left. Stories of people, families, and moments that have changed entire communities forever. This is Murders in Massachusetts. I'm Jonathan Power, creator, executive producer, and host. Each episode will take a closer look at real cases across the Bay State. Not just what happened, but where it happened, and how it continues to shape the people and places left behind. Because these aren't just headlines, they're part of the towns we call home. And if you find these stories meaningful, be sure to follow the podcast so you always know when new episodes are available. This podcast discusses real crimes, including murder, and in some cases, crimes involving children. These topics may be disturbing for some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. As the investigation continues that morning, investigators begin to document what they found inside the home. Jack and Jeri, located in the living room, lying on the floor, both had been shot. Jack suffered multiple gunshot wounds to the head, neck, and chest, while Jeri had been shot once in the head. They were found close to one another, positioned head to head.
They seem to be comfortable with the gun. They seem to be comfortable escalating directly to deadly force. This wasn't a fight that got out of control. We don't see any signs of escalation as far as the other injuries on the victims, and so it did seem they were likely comfortable with this weapon to some extent. I'm not going to say they had any formal training, but they were comfortable with the weapon.
The Andover townsman reported bullets had gone through the floor. However, no bullet casings were found at the scene, a detail that, for investigators, would become an important part of understanding what happened inside that room. Meanwhile, investigators would soon locate the Magee's SUV. But instead of providing clarity, it only raised more questions. Establishing a timeline quickly became a priority. Investigators began working to determine when the murders may have occurred. Early estimates place it sometime around 7 p.m. on December 13th, though reports have suggested the window could extend from as early as 5:30 p.m. to as late as 9 p.m. that evening. But timelines like these are really exact, and without us having direct access to official records, there are limits to what we can confirm with certainty. It was noted that both of the Magee's children, John and Holly, had alibis at the time of the murders. However, no further information was available. Former Andover Police Chief Brian Petullo said, upon officers arriving at the scene, they found 2 victims on the first floor of the residence, and those victims had been shot, and were classifying this as a double homicide.
Maybe there was a final conversation, and however that conversation went, there was going to be that outcome or maybe another outcome. But whatever, I believe the offender had to say something to them. So it's either something along those lines that they needed to have this interpersonal interaction with them before they killed them. And, I think the offender either went there to kill them, and there was not going to be any debate or discussion on their part, or they were going there to have a discussion with them, and whatever the result of that was, they were going to make that determination. But they had an idea: if this conversation goes this way, I'm going to kill them. If the conversation goes this way, then they will not, I'll let them live. Whatever it was, the Magees, I don't believe, thought this was a serious conversation of any kind. And I don't think they had any concern with the person. I mean, at least not to this extent. I just don't think they were at all aware of what was going to happen. I think they were comfortable with the person. The TV being on has always struck me as you don't just have the TV on. Even if you have, let's say, a neighbor over for a visit, you turn your TV off, you're talking with your neighbor. It's just such something you do with people you're just really comfortable with. And unless and I can't recall if the sound was on or off, unless they just muted it. But generally people, and I think the Magees were polite, and maybe, I'm not saying they're super formal, but probably polite enough that they had a guest, they would turn off the TV. They wouldn't just turn off the sound.
And it was noted that the dog was not locked up when the police arrived, when the daughter arrived the next morning, but also when the police arrived, which if, person they were potentially letting into the house, if that's what happened, the dog may have been locked up if it was not someone familiar to them.
Yeah, the dog was agitated, is what was told to me, but the leash was on the island in the kitchen, which was strange because Jeri kept a clean house, put things away. So I think that's a clue that they may have let somebody into their home, and then all this happened. There's nothing stolen from the house.
No.
Other than the bodies, and what happened in the living room of the house. It's not ransacked. The rest of the house looks normal. So this does seem like it was some kind of targeted attack.
Days, weeks, and months started to pass by with no new information about the case or any arrests.
So the investigators reportedly interviewed more than 50 people during the investigation. From your reporting, what stands out in the scope of that type of investigation?
It shows that they're casting a wide net. It shows that they're looking for something, anything that would point them in the right direction. And when you have 50 people, they're being thorough. They're looking at everything. They're looking at business associates. They're looking at friends. And, of course, they're looking at family because they have to look at family. They start, in a tight circle and work their way out. And with 50 people being interviewed, it tells me it's a pretty big circle that they're looking at.
The family, the closest people, the people that would, quote, benefit, have to be looked at, have to be ruled out. That's with any case at all. And that was done. It was very thorough. I know the finances were looked at thoroughly, and nothing stood out to investigators. And beyond that, I am not aware of anything else that would put them at risk for this kind of violent attack. Didn't really make a lot of sense. And we struggled with the idea, is there an accomplice? We couldn't rule that out. Generally, even when there's more than one victim, statistically, there is only one offender. And I think a lot of people think, well, if you have two victims, you probably have two offenders. That statistically does not bear out. So unless we see something that is obvious that there were two people there, like let's say they find, two different DNA profiles at a scene, or that, witnesses see two people go into the house, or there are things that happen that had to have happened simultaneously that required two people to be there. Unless we see something obvious like that, we really have to just default back to it's most likely one offender. And in this case, at the crime scene, we don't see any indication that two people were there. There's just nothing. And we're not privy to DNA testing, and we don't have all the lab results. So we don't know if, there was DNA found and it belonged to two different people. We just don't know that. But from what we know and what we have available to us publicly, we don't have that information. And there's just nothing to indicate at that crime there was more than one person there. However, the logistics of getting to the house without a car, unless you're a neighbor. I mean, you can't, that's another thing. You can't rule out a neighbor walking over and then taking the car, taking it down to Boston, somehow taking public transportation back. I guess you can't rule that out. But the person got there somehow, whether they took a train and walked, whether they were dropped off, whether, there's a combination of ways they could have gotten there. Or they could have someone who brought them there, and then someone who picked them up somewhere in the North End or met them somewhere and at some later point. And so what we didn't want to do is rule out that there might be an accomplice, and whether they knew about what was going to happen prior. We couldn't answer that, but we just couldn't rule that out. And we wanted to make sure that we put that out there in case somebody does have that information, and with the passage of time, their conscience gets the better of them. But that person may not exist, but we have to consider it just based on the totality of how the crime was carried out.
John and Holly stayed private, only speaking with Bob Ward in the many years later, but never speaking publicly, holding a press conference, or appearing on TV. It was reported that at the time of the Magee's murders, their son John was set to take over the construction and development company. There appeared to be no known grievances with the family over anything business or personal. However, as part of my investigation, we did identify that Jack burst into the public spotlight in Tewksbury in 2003, claiming he had owned 17 acres along I-93 where the former Mills Corporation had planned to build a mall. He claimed that tax maps incorrectly listed the Perkins family as owning the land. Dubbed the Mills Mall fiasco, which created a community uproar at the time, the Tewksbury land dispute ended after more than a year of negotiations when the Perkins family paid Jack more than $1 million for all rights to the disputed 17 acres and sold the entire property to Mills Corp, which has since gone out of business. Simon Property Group acquired the land in 2007. The plan to build a regional mall at the junction of Tewksbury, Wilmington, and Andover on Interstate 93 was stuck in limbo for decades and was never developed. Simon Property Group decided against development of the site because it owns the nearby Burlington Mall, and the proposal hinged on construction of an interchange between exits 41 and 42, which required federal funding. A year and a half after the murders in June of 2013, the Magee's children would list the home for sale for $1,250,000. The home would ultimately sell in April of 2014 for $942,200. Public records show that John had been renting up until he purchased a home in a suburb just outside of Boston in September of 2015, which is where he currently resides. Whereas Holly appeared to be more established at the time of the murders and in the decade after, residing in a bedroom community about 30 minutes from Andover. In a press conference 4 years later, Essex County District Attorney at the time, Jonathan Blaggett, revealed information about Jack and Jeri's activities on December 13th, also stating, quote, "The information we have is known to us and the perpetrators will not be made public until we have effectuated an arrest," quote. In the years to follow, the DA's office would release information about the weapon used. DA Paul Tucker stating, "We know it was a .45 caliber. We think it probably might be an older weapon in terms of a firearm, but it's a .45 caliber firearm."
It did say some sort of older type of weapon. So that would tell me, and I'm just, I guess, hypothesizing that generally, if I was, if you're going to commit a murder, I want to use myself, but if you're going to commit a murder, you want to use a very efficient weapon, the best available, I would think. And to me, this tells me this was the gun that this person had available to them.
To me, the big secret, other than who the killer was, is why did this happen? The DA also revealed to me that the gun that was used was an older caliber. It was a .45 caliber gun. They're thinking that it could have been an antique gun. So, it's something they don't normally see. And the fact that the daughter told me that they were dressed in their normal street clothes, they had not yet changed into their pajamas, suggests that this happened soon after after John left for the day and after Holly called them. It's right around the same time in that 4 to 5 o'clock hour. It doesn't look like they had anything to eat, like they hadn't eaten dinner yet. And they were just kind of in the house. They brought the dog out for a walk, put the leash down, and then something happens. Did the killer get in through the garage? Kind of sounds that way to me. Or they didn't know how to close the garage door behind them when they stole the vehicle.
Absolutely.
So, I definitely think this family deserves some answers. I mean, it was a tight-knit family. I talked to both of the children, and they are hungry for answers to this case.
From all reports, to the best of our knowledge, the Magee Multi-Generational Development Company would go out of business or bankrupt. However, John would continue to flip homes instead of developing, working on a much smaller scale. Just days before the 10th anniversary of the murders on December 9, 2021, Essex County District Attorney at the time, Jonathan Blaggett, and Andover Police Chief Patrick Keefe released the following statement on behalf of John and Holly. Quote, "It has been almost 10 years since the tragic deaths of Jack and Jeri Magee. Our family has lost 10 years of love, smiles, wisdom, support, and happiness for them. For the past decade, we have hoped and prayed for answers and closure to this horrible crime. We hope that the 10-year commemoration of this terrible event will encourage those who have information on this crime to come forward. The time is now, and this injustice should not continue. We support the authorities in their investigation and hope that they will be able to bring this case to a clear conclusion soon. Jack and Jeri will live forever in our hearts and memories, but the people who committed this act are still at large, and they need to be brought to justice. We ask anyone who has any knowledge of what happened to Jack and Jeri immediately to come forward to the Andover Police Department. Please help us solve this crime." End quote.
The police are not getting the information they need. And I think the thing that they need most of all is a motive. Why would somebody want to kill these two people? What was going on in their background? What was going on in their lives? Did someone really hate them this much to do this? Was there some kind of dispute, business dispute? It doesn't make any sense. And I think that is the biggest reason this remains unsolved. There's no motive here, no natural person to be looking at. There's got to be someone, like you said, who knows what happened to them. This didn't come from out of the blue. And there isn't, there aren't other similar murders taking place of prominent local businessmen who were surprised in their house and killed by somebody. So I think it has all the earmarks of somebody that knew them, had some kind of grievance with them, and then tried to make this look like something else. I don't think it's a mob hit at all. It does not look like a mob hit. I don't think they would go to this trouble of getting into someone's house and murdering them in their living room when anybody could be coming back in. I think this is someone who was close to them, knew their what their daily schedule was like, and felt brave enough that they could do this. Felt brave enough they could drive out of the neighborhood and drive all the way down to Boston and not be seen. Yeah, I just thought some of the observations that John and Holly had. John said he was at the house until 4 o'clock. He was with both of his parents for part of the day, and they were both there when he left. And then Holly is on the phone with the mother to try to set up a shopping date. She was going to drop the kids off and go Christmas shopping. She's at the house the next morning, and the door is locked. And it was actually her young daughter that found the grandparents in the living room. And I thought that was so horrific that a young child would find the bodies like that.
We have seen so many cases where a motive develops, and to you and me, it doesn't seem like a motive for murder. It's like, that makes no sense. Why would someone escalate to murder just based on this very minor grievance? Like, we might look at that. We can't, you have to put yourself in the offender's shoes. So just because we don't see anything doesn't mean somebody didn't develop some kind of grievance or motive for this. And it's just not apparent to those of us that are looking for all the typical motives, financial, relationship issues, business issues with infidelity or drugs and gambling, all these things that we kind of think is the typical issues or typical things that elevate people's risk. And we don't see that, but we don't know if something happened, did one of them have an interaction with somebody and that person took it the wrong way and they developed a grievance and that grievance built and built and built, and we just have no way of knowing.
This story doesn't stay in the public's consciousness that much because it was horrific when it happened, but the family's very private. And look how long it was before they talked to anybody. They talked to me a couple of years ago,
Yes.
and it was a long time before they got up the courage to do that. And even then, they didn't feel comfortable going on camera.
Yes.
You know, we did it old school, where I just took out my notebook and jotted down notes and got some quotes from them that way. You know, they're very private. They don't want this kind of attention.
Yeah.
And that, I totally respect that and understand that. But I think people's attention spans can be short, and I'm glad you're doing this because people need to know that this happened and that killer is still out there.
Seven Orchard Crossing would be listed again for sale in September of 2024 for just under $1.8 million. And it would sit on the market for almost a year before selling in July of 2025 for $1.6 million. The Andover Police Department declined to comment publicly on this case, noting that the investigation remains open and is being managed by the Essex County District Attorney's Office. The Essex County District Attorney's Office had not returned our attempts for comment by the distribution of this podcast. As of April 2026, this case remains open and unsolved. We will continue to follow any developments and share updates as they become available. Anyone with any information is encouraged to contact the Massachusetts State Police detectives assigned to the District Attorney's Office at 978-745-8908. Thank you for listening to Murders in Massachusetts. If this episode resonated with you, please consider sharing it. And be sure to follow or hit the like button so you always know when new episodes are released. Multi-part episodes will be released on a weekly basis, while standalone episodes will follow a bi-weekly release schedule. You can always find more information about this or any episode at murdersinma.com. If you have any insight into a case or a story you believe should be told, you can reach me directly at murdersinmapodcasts@gmail.com. And as always, remember the stories we tell here are about real people, real families, and communities that continue to carry them. I'm Jonathan Power. We'll see you next time.